What's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and today we have to take a look at the Winnipeg Jets. So after a very roller coaster, up and down season, the Winnipeg Jets season ended last week against the Vegas Golden Knights, and we're going to take a look at the Jets, how their season went. You guys will love that. The playoffs, Rick Bowness, what he had to say about the team, and that kind of leads into what the future of the Winnipeg Jets will look like. So we're going to get to all of that today. So the Winnipeg Jets, going back to January, were toward the top of the National Hockey League standings. They led the Central Division. Looked like the really good comeback story of the season. You know, they missed the playoffs last season. Disappointing season for them. They made some changes to the blue line. And all of a sudden, with Rick Bowness, they were really a good hockey team. Then down the stretch, going into the trade deadline, and after the trade deadline, the Jets barely squeaked their way into the playoffs. An unmotivated, very stubborn bunch in Winnipeg kind of led to their downfall. Now, there was a lot of injuries to the Jets, and that was definitely put on display, especially in the playoffs. You know, I think the nail in the coffin for this team definitely was Josh Morrissey being out. That was a really tough injury. He had a lower body injury. That really hurt the Jets. And obviously just the other list of injuries, you know, no Nikolai Ehlers, no Gagne, no Perfetti, no Scheifele. You know, it just got to a point where it was like, all right, you know, the injuries alone will put this team out. But they really didn't help themselves even before the injuries. You know, really shout out to the Jets fan base. Really, really good bunch there. They really, you know, they did some good stuff. You know, I love the white out there. I think it's really cool. They did a really nice job with that. I'm disappointed they couldn't find a way to pull out that win in I think it was game 3 last Saturday. But a really good environment. Nonetheless, you know, those are the kind of games where you're kind of like, oh, we could have had a chance in this series, but they couldn't find a way to pull out games like that, and it really hurt them. You know, looking at their regular season, like I said, they had a really good start to the season, played really well. Their guys were gunning, they were scoring. And then as the season kind of progressed, you could tell that they just kind of weren't buying into the Rick Bowness system, and it really hurt them. They only had one guy with 80 points this season. That was Kyle Connor with 31 goals and 49 assists. But he was still a minus 11. This team, that was a really interesting tidbit with this team. You know, a lot of this team was a minus, and a lot of the guys were kind of their top, you know, the higher end players. Mark Scheifele was a minus 16. Neil Pionk was a minus 12. And Kyle Connor was a minus 11. So, you know, 3 pretty prominent players on this team were a really bad minus this season. And I think a lot of that kind of is going to tell you what the future of this team is because of the lack of buy-in to defense. There was a lot of odd man rushes and just not trusting the defensive system that really hurt this team, you know, throughout the end of the regular season and into the playoffs. A lot of this team was kind of carried on the back of Connor Hellebuck. And they ran him to the ground. They need a backup goalie. I think that's something that the Jets really need to do. The way they mishandled Eric Comrie last year was really puzzling. By Kevin Cheveldayoff, that's something that needs to change. They need a competent backup goalie that can just limit those starts. Because, what was it? I think Hellebuck played 62 games this season, and he just burnt himself out. They need another goalie to kind of help him out. So that's one thing that needs to change. I think we're going to see a lot of change just overall with the Jets. You look at their UFAs up front. Dubois is an RFA. Nemesnikov and Carson Kuhlman. Saku Manalainen, Sam Gagne are UFAs. Kevin Stenlin, Axel Janssen-Fjallby, and Morgan Barron are all RFA forwards. So, you know, they've got a lot of guys that are probably on their way out. On defense, not too crazy. They've got David Rittich. Oh, no. Goaltending is David Rittich. That's it. Defensively, they've got 2 RFAs in Dylan Sandberg and Logan Stanley. And that's it. So I think a lot of the guys that have 2-year deals are the ones you have to look at in Winnipeg. Specifically, their former captain, Blake Wheeler. He's got 2 years left. Well, now 1 year left on his deal at the conclusion of this season. So 1 year left. Scheifele also, his deal ends next season. Same thing for Nino Niederreiter. 1 year left. Defensively, you've got Brendan Dillon and Dylan DeMello that I look at. And Connor Hellebuck, after next season, will be a UFA. So the Jets have a lot of interesting things. Now, from what I've been hearing, it doesn't sound like a full-on rebuild in Winnipeg. But I'm not sold on that yet. I think the idea is they want to keep this team from a rebuild. But if let's put it this way, if Connor Hellebuck decides to leave this team and does not want to extend, they're going in a rebuild. Because if they don't have Connor Hellebuck, there isn't much backbone to this team. And guys like Cole Perfetti are still young enough where you could kind of do that, right? And you have a guy like Kyle Connor, who's here for a couple of seasons. You can kind of ride him out through a little bit of a rebuild, right? So if you've got a base of Morgan Barron, Mason Appleton, and Cole Perfetti, along with some of your other younger guys that are in the system, like Brad Lambert, Chaz Lucius, Ville Heinola, Elias Samuelson, you can kind of ride out a rebuild for a year or two with those guys. And I think that might be the best direction for the Jets. Try and get as much value as you can for Blake Wheeler, Scheifele, and you've still got a good base. Dubois, right? So if you kept, let's just put it this way. Let's just say, Ehlers, Morgan Barron, right? So those two forwards, Kyle Connor, that's three forwards, Perfetti, Lucius, Lambert. That's your core forward group. Then defensively, you build this team around Josh Morrissey, Neil Pionk, Dylan Sandberg, and then you've got Elias Samuelson and Ville Heinola and Simon Lundmark. There's your defense. And again, depending on what happens with guys like Hellebuck, it doesn't really matter because you've still got that base and that core around that, right? Other than Hellebuck, right? That's really the key piece. If Hellebuck stays, you kind of go through a quick retool. But if not, I think it's best that they rebuild this team. And again, the problem with the Jets is, the reason I think they have to go through a rebuild and the quick retool doesn't work here is we know how difficult of a market it is to sell to free agents to play in Winnipeg, right? We know that. That is a known fact in Winnipeg. So they can't just go get guys in free agency and quote-unquote fix this team and quickly retool it. It doesn't work that way. They need guys that want to play in Winnipeg. And I think that's going to be a tough sell, but if there's guys that want to be there, it's going to be a lot easier for them. And if there's enough guys in the free agent market in this year and next year that want to go to Winnipeg, all right, fine. Maybe they're able to retool it fairly quickly. But if not, like high-end players that can't replace guys like Scheifele and Dubois and Wheeler, it's going to be a tough sell. So when I look at the Jets, they have some assets if they want to move as well, right? They have their first-round pick this year. They have their third-round pick. They have 2 fifth-round picks. They could fix this thing fairly quickly. If they're able to recoup good assets for, let's say they get even they should get a first-round pick for Blake Wheeler. He had 50 points this season on the third line for the Jets. I would think if they are willing to retain salary, they should be able to get a first-round pick for Blake Wheeler, right? If Cheveldayoff is doing his due diligence and able to do his job, I think they can get a first-round pick for him, right? For a 50-point player, you got to find a way to scratch that out. Mark Scheifele, I think there's going to be some value there. Now, there is some questions about his attitude and things like that, but teams out there, I think you could sell them on. Listen, he's not a good fit for our team. I think in a new environment, he will be a good fit for you. So I think they could definitely get a first and a second, probably for Blake Wheeler, for Mark Scheifele. So now you're looking at maybe potentially 3 first and second round picks together, right? Maybe 2 first and a second for those 2 players, right? Theoretically, right? Same thing for Dubois. I think they could get a first round pick for Dubois. I think a lot of teams out there, especially with how he played in the beginning of this series, I think teams saw how dominant he can be. I think he's a poor man Nathan McKinnon. He is really that good. He's really difficult to play against, especially come playoff time. And I think teams would be willing to give up a pretty good package for a guy like Dubois just for this season. And if he signs in Montreal next season, who cares? I think teams will be willing to give up the assets to pick him up. I look at a guy like Nino Niederreiter. I think they should try to trade him. It's disappointing with how things went this season. He was a decent pickup, but I think you try and get whatever you can for him. Maybe he ends up being a guy you move at the deadline next year, and I think that's very much a possibility, because what is his value at right now? Can you even get a second for him? So that's something to look at. I think some guys that you'd be willing to let go, Nemesnikov, I think that's okay. Kuhlman, Manalainen, Gagne, I think you could live with those guys just leaving. See what you could get for guys like Brendan Dillon and Dylan DeMello. Two former San Jose Shark guys. They've been good defensemen in the past. I think there's some value in those guys. I think I think you'd try to keep Nate Schmidt and Neil Pionk, specifically Pionk in particular. But again, him and Morrissey are kind of the blueprint for what you want to build on the blue line. And then goaltending, like I said, a lot of the goaltending is going to ride on whether Hellebuck wants to stay or not. I think they need to make that decision pretty quickly here this summer, whether they can trade him a year out from, UFA, or try to trade him this summer and get as much value for him as possible, because I think that is something that is critical for the Jets because of how important Hellebuck is overall to the team. And, I think even seeing with how good he's been this season, if there's no blueprint around him, you maybe should see this is the maximum amount you can get out of him. Maybe it's best that they do trade him. So let me know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of the Winnipeg Jets? I think this is a team that has a lot of, I think it's frustrating because they've got the talent there. They just couldn't put it all together. And there really wasn't a lot of camaraderie between this team. And we kind of saw that on full display in this first round series. And credit to the Vegas Golden Knights. They really took it to them. They played really well. The Jets just don't have the overall personnel in terms of a fit around Rick Bowness. Bowness's press conference, the questions at the end of the season, there's no way that this group is back next season. I just don't see it. Rick Bowness was very, very hot on the stove with a lot of these players, and I think that we're seeing this team right now, the lack of buy-in is forcing change in personnel, and I think I'm interested. Definitely going to be one of the more interesting teams going into this offseason to see what they do. I think you try to get maximum return for whoever you can that you really don't see a future in, and I'm really interested to see what the Jets get in return. So let me know what you guys think down below. With the Jets, I think they should definitely be looking at a team like the Washington Capitals. Can they find a way to make a deal work for guys like maybe Dylan DeMello or Brendan Dillon with a little bit of term to try and help that blue line in Washington? I look at a guy, honestly, Dubois and Scheifele in particular, I think they would be really good fits on the Washington Capitals. I think the Capitals have the assets too, that I think that the Jets should be looking at a team like that, but that's for another day's discussion. But let me know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of the Winnipeg Jets? Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next time. Peace.